But there's a little island I long there to be. Prince Edward Island is heaven to me.
Hello, fellow CARP members. My name is Bob McKenna. I am the former chair of the PEI chapter of CARP. And with us today is Charlottetown NDP candidate Joe Byrne. And we're very fortunate to have our very own Bill VanGorder all the way from Halifax. He will be interviewing Joe today. And Bill is the Chief Advocacy Officer for CARP and also a longtime board member. Thank you, Bill, for joining us. And would you like to introduce your guest?
Good. Well, thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Very pleased to be with you all today and to have Joe Byrne with us. As I know many of you know, Joe has served as the leader of the New Democratic Party of Prince Edward Island. He did from 2018 to 2020, but he's a seasoned community builder and a political organizer who's fought very hard for the rights of immigrants and refugees. And he really does know what it means to make a difference when governments invest in people. So thank you for taking the time to join us today, Joe. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. It's wonderful to be here and the opportunity to speak to CARP members.
Well, we've got so many areas we could talk about. Well, we only have half an hour, so I'll get right to the questions. And I think first to you, what do you think are the major concerns in this election that you're focusing on in your campaign?
Well, the three issues, policy issues that are coming up are clearly affordability, healthcare, and housing. And that is so consistent. I would say that in more than 90 and maybe even more than 95% of the doors that I've knocked on, those are the issues that resonate with people. And then there's two kind of emotional responses that I'm getting at the door. And I'd say one part is fear and anxiety that's really directed toward the leader of the Conservatives. There's a lot of that. And so people like Natalie Jameson, the local candidate, but are really reluctant to have Pierre Poilievre as the captain of this ship. And the other one is anger towards Donald Trump. And I keep reminding people that, that's not our circus and he's not our clown. So how much space we give to him is a choice that we make, and we don't need to give him that much. But those are, I'd say, the three policy issues and the two emotional hooks that we have in the campaign.
Good. Well, let's talk about the three of those then to begin with, and the first is affordability. What are the steps that you would have your party take, and how will you influence if you hold a balance of power again, and as you did the last time, how will you influence affordability, especially for seniors and their concern about their kids and their grandkids?
So I'll get to the senior question as part two, because the last few weeks of the campaign, we're focusing a lot on a basic income guarantee, which is generally directed towards people between 18 and 64, and a pilot project on PEI, which has been reviewed by some of the top economists in the country. It's doable, it's affordable, but what it means, and this is essential and a segue to the next piece, we live in a country that is really wealthy, where most of us are unaware of how wealthy we are in relationship to the rest of the world. But the wealth in this country, if it's distributed properly, everybody from the time they're born until the time that they say goodbye to the rest of us should have a decent place to live, safe, affordable place to live, and enough food on their table. And this goes right into the next piece, it's not directly just towards seniors, because there's another piece on that, but it's directed towards everybody. Affordability, what I'm hearing is the ridiculous gouging that's happening at our grocery stores. And there's basically 4 grocery corporations in this country that do it. That's Sobeys and Loblaws and Walmart and Costco. And they're able to gouge us because nobody has had the presence of mind to put any limitations on how they gouge people. So when we have, I'll use the price of milk, for example, which has been stable and goes up little by little, but the price of butter and cheese is ridiculous. And then if you look at it, like going in and getting a block of cheese for $8.50 when milk prices are still there, and we don't see dairy farmers are not making a killing on this. They're able, because we have supply management, they're able to have a reasonable rate of return, but they're not becoming millionaires over the price of cheese, even though the price of cheese has skyrocketed. And I'd say the same thing. Bill, I got to confess, butter and bacon are like food groups for me here. Okay. So, and I go into the grocery store and I look at bacon at like $8 or $9 for half a kilo. It's like ridiculous. Why do we do that? And I know some pork farmers, big farmers, that they're not making any more money, but the grocery stores do. So on food affordability, I think the clear way forward is regulation. And I do this exactly the way it should be done. You go to corporations, the four that are there, you sit them down and say, here's the objective. How are you planning to get there? And you trust but verify. So you always, in a capitalist society where we're a little hesitant to regulate sometimes, you give people an option. Do it because you want to do it. And then show us and let us verify that it's actually getting done. If they don't want to do that, then you regulate. Now, the issue that I have, and why I think under a liberal or a conservative government, we're not going to see the regulations that are going to come into place. They're going to try and harangue them with absolutely no way to enforce it. And why do we know that? Well, because the same gouging, and I'll give the Liberal government some credit in getting us through COVID with the CERB payments and the loans to small business, or that they put out. They understood that people had to have an income. What they didn't do was regulate pricing. And so we saw that disaster unfold day after day, week after week during COVID, where there was a whole bunch of speculation in the market that people just decided that they would gouge others. That is a crazy way to do business, but it's not an uncommon way to do business. And if we want that done in a different way, we have to regulate it. The third piece that will affect seniors is it has to be rent controls. So when the market is unable to guarantee at any reasonable level the basics of life, food and lodging are not optional for us. They're actually they're a human right. And if the market isn't able to guarantee that, then it has to be the government's job to come in and regulate it. And regulate it in discussion with all the players. First, with those that are renting, and then the tenants, and then of course you have to include the owners. But the priority has to be for government to make sure that those who are most vulnerable actually have enough of a guarantee for the basics of life. And this feeds right into the question of healthcare. The three of them, but sorry, Bill, I don't need to interrupt.
Say, before we get into healthcare, one of the things that's often not understood, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it. You mentioned, of course, the guaranteed income, and the other parties would say that this is just going to build up deficits. We can't afford these deficits. How do we afford and how do we go about making sure everybody has a basic guaranteed income and still be able to afford it as a country?
Well, not to go through the whole history, but when we saw the liberal austerity of the 1990s under the Chrétien Martin Liberal government, what they did, they came in and they sold us a bill of goods that actually wasn't true. They said, we're going to pay down the debt and deficit. And they did it by cutting federal programs. So they didn't actually cut expenses. They cut the funding part of it. And so they cut post-secondary education, healthcare, and social services. They just sliced it. The costs weren't adjusted at all. They just transferred the responsibility of paying this down to the provinces, who then transferred it to municipalities and on to individuals. This is a crazy way of doing it. And by the way, just so that your viewers know, of all the OECD countries, the only one that didn't meet their debt and deficit goals in those years from the 1990s to the early 2000s was Italy. And the only one that met them by cutting and slashing essential programs was Canada. All the other OECD countries got to a point where they could address their debt and deficit problems, because this was standard across Western economies. And but the others decided to do it through a combination of growth and taxation, and not through cutting and slashing. Cutting and slashing has never been a way. When you cut essential services, and Bob and I were talking about this morning, we always pay the price. Everybody should understand we always pay the price. When you cut the most vulnerable, then the biggest expense that we're going to have, if you cut income support programs or housing support programs, which we watched the Liberals do in the 1990s, you end up putting huge stresses on the health system. So the costs actually don't go down. If we want costs to go down, and this is the social determinants of health that we've been talking about for years, you actually make sure that people can eat well. So sorry to be moving my head, but like, this really gets me going here, Bill. And if we make sure that people have a decent place to live and enough food on their table, their stress levels go down, their ability to hope in their own future and design their own future goes up. And of course, that makes it much more affordable right across the system. The fallacy is that if we cut government expenditures, that all of a sudden the costs go away. It's just a fallacy. It's actually not true. Never been true. And how we spend money is always up for debate. And as this friend of mine, when I worked and lived in Dominican Republic, said to me, never listen to what a government says. Always look where they spend their money. So in December, we watched the federal Liberals, and Mark Carney was touted out by Justin Trudeau as one of his members of his Council of Economic Advisors. This group of people decided that the right way to address the Trump tariffs was to spend $1.3 billion on border security. We have a health crisis and a housing crisis, and they decided to spend money on border security with helicopters that we had to lease from the Americans. I mean, if it wasn't so sad, it would be a late night sketch on Saturday Night Live. But this is actually people's lives we're talking about. So that kind of decision making, economic decision making, which inflicts pain on other people, should always be looked at askance, because there are different pathways forward.
Good, thank you. Good outline. Let's move now to healthcare. The NDP promised to have primary care provided for everyone by the year 2030. How would you address that, especially in your riding in Charlottetown and the rest of the province? And because healthcare is always touted as a provincial matter, how can a federal member in a federal parliament really help deliver that service to all of the people in Charlottetown?
We have 5 principles of the Canada Health Act that are used to assess programs across all 10 provinces and 3 territories. That's federal legislation. The idea that the federal government will justify any kind of decision making by pushing it off to the provinces, again, is just an abdication of responsibility. These healthcare is under the Constitution a provincial responsibility, but functionally and legally, it's also part of the federal government. And there should never be passing the buck between either of these levels of government. They have to work in tandem. And by the way, you know when we always see this kind of discussion is when the federal government doesn't actually have an answer, and they say, well, that's just the provincial government responsibility. It's because they don't have an answer. But as a New Democrat, you'll understand, and your readers will understand, that healthcare is part of the New Democrat DNA, right? It's why, just looking at pharmacare, when Jean Chrétien wandered around the country in 1993 promising a pharmacare program, I don't think anybody could take him seriously. They were in government, by the way, Bill, 7 times for more than 20 years. And the only time they delivered a program that they promised was when the NDP and Jagmeet put a line in the sand saying, if you don't do this, you will not stay in government. Nobody should have to govern like that. They came up with a promise of their own volition in the 1990s. They could have delivered it in 93, they could have delivered it in 96, they could have delivered it in 2001, 2003. They chose not to, and until they were forced. And by the way, in 2019, when I was campaigning provincially, and we were the party that pitched the medical school, and I don't take any of this personally, but the criticism that was leveled at me by all the other political parties and how ridiculous it was and how it was a pie in the sky and economically irresponsible. That's what I was told to my face, written about it in the papers, criticized on TV and the radio. I said to one of the journalists who criticized me, we were having a coffee, said, why would you do that without pitching your own ideas? So this is a new idea, one of the few that we saw in 30 years. And where are we at now? And I told him, I said, I'm a politician. You should be able to criticize a politician. And as a politician, I'm never going to take it personally. But we had a doctor shortage, and we had to do something about it. And creation of the medical school was an answer, and one that I'm glad to see that we're moving ahead on. And we will see lots of positive results of that. We also have a licensing issue, because just a couple of years ago, as I teach driving, I had 3 doctors and a medical student in the car, all GPs, all who wanted to practice on PEI, and none of whom the minister would give a license to. And the minister then says, well, it's up to the college. Again, remember passing the buck? When a government or a medical, like a professional body or so doesn't want to do something, they always pass the buck. As a New Democrat, I'm not going to pass the buck to anybody. I'm in a position to make decisions and to actually enforce those decisions. Should they be done sensitively? Should they be rammed down people's throat? No, they can be negotiated. But the end result needs to be, we have a system that depends on doctors and nurse practitioners and access points into specialists. We need that to work. Seniors, as we generally, as we age, we tend to use the medical system more. And so we have to make sure that for seniors who have spent their lives working, based on an understanding that these services would be available, we should at least make sure that they're available.
Yeah, good. You mentioned you mentioned the pharmacare program, and the other program was the dental care program, both of which came in this year in the form they're now in, but neither of them are as effective as most of us would like them to be. The pharmacare program only covers a portion of diabetes drugs and some other contraceptive procedures. The dental care program has limped along, seems to be picking up steam, but is not covering everyone, especially in rural areas where they're limited to dentists who already have full programs with people who pay full price. What can you do to make those two programs, pharmacare and dental care, really national programs that serve the people, the seniors that they need to?
Well, I'd say this is why I'm running for the New Democrats, because neither of those programs reflect what the New Democrat priority was, but they do reflect the way that the Liberals were going to negotiate. The Liberals were never going to deliver an NDP pharmacare or a dental care program. And by the way, Jagmeet says he's really funny when he says, but he's absolutely serious. Imagine that we said, we have a healthcare program and we're going to cover our body, except not teeth, because teeth aren't an essential part of the body. Or we're not going to cover our ears or our eyes because they're not essential. We need to keep developing our healthcare system that includes all parts of our body, and recognize that when we don't, this is because this happens at the door. When people have a dental issue that's not addressed, they end up having a health issue. We had years ago in our neighborhood, we had a young fella die of an infected tooth. He was only in his early 30s. This is the reality, and so we need to keep working at it. Where we don't have dentists, and this is the Tommy Douglas approach. When the doctor started objecting to Medicare and Common Health, and he said, well, we're not going to deliver that. Well, then we'll get other doctors. Like at some point, a medical professional will decide that they want to participate or don't participate. It's a free country. They can do that. But if they don't want to participate, then we have to make sure that we get dentists in that do. And if that means that we're going to license foreign dentists to come in and work in those practices, that's what we'll do. Because we have to make it clear that access to healthcare is not optional. It is a right. And then government programs have to reflect that approach. And that means if not that anybody wants to play hardball with decent medical professionals, but if they don't want to provide those resources, then it's the government responsibility to make sure that the system gets adjusted so that those resources are available. And I'd say the same thing. I mean, I had a couple of friends of mine. I was visiting them on Friday, and they said, "Thank you, because we just got our dental cards, and neither one of them has dental insurance."
Yeah. Well, and the problem, of course, for those people is the card doesn't mean they're necessarily going to get the service. So that's what has to be worked on. Yeah. One item that we haven't talked about at all, but is very important to many of our CARP members, and that is the environment issues. And I'm wondering what your plans are for environment issues, especially in your riding and on the island.
I'm really glad you brought it up, Bill, because at the Charlottetown Chamber of Commerce debate on Thursday, I actually raised that same thing. This is my fourth election, and we are in an environmental crisis right now. It's an existential crisis, and we're not even talking about it. I'll go back to the fear, anxiety, and anger that we're responding to for many people, and the environment hasn't been front and center. By the way, just to address it, like the carbon tax, what I said about the carbon tax, it was introduced as a way to actually change our behaviors and how we would use carbon fuels. That's what it was designed to do. It never actually did that. I mean, it was revenue neutral, so some people paid more than others, and other people, but it never fundamentally altered our behaviors to consume. And so, from a taxation point of view, which either has an ability to change behaviors or generate revenues, the carbon tax had to go. It was unpopular, but it also didn't meet its objective. But I would say that it did meet another objective that wasn't stated at the time, and that the discussion around the carbon tax actually heightened our understanding of it and our awareness that it is an issue. And now we're in an election, which is going to has an ability to set policy, environmental policy, and we're not even talking about it. So the NDP policy actually hasn't changed that much in the last 15 years. We want polluters to pay. Of course, polluters will end up passing it down, but polluters have to pay. And we have to stop subsidies to the oil and gas extraction industries. We subsidize corporations way too much, and we do it on an understanding that this is somehow essential. Once we start removing those subsidies, and once we start making polluters pay. And by the way, one of the pieces that's new on this is that on imports, that we will be able to apply a carbon tax on an import at point of origin. So we can look at how a product is actually manufactured and determine what kind of carbon price should be paid on that. And so then the importer has to pay that extra carbon tax, because we are in this in the whole world. So we can't just ignore the fact that other countries are not in a position, either economically or politically, to impose good, like healthy and environmental standards. So we have to do that because we should be responsible. And if we bring those simple points in, and plus the research and development, like how we're going to use electricity. Well, we should not be thinking that every place is going to have hydroelectric, and hydroelectric has a big environmental footprint. It can be produced relatively cleanly, but the construction of that, and I was living in Quebec at the time when they decided to reverse the whole flow of a river, You know, like that makes a difference to our environment. But we have to keep researching it. Do solar and wind, can they provide the kind of resource base that we need? No, but they're not nothing. So there's places where that makes more sense than others, and we should not be afraid to do that. But moving us along on the environment has to happen. I live in downtown Charlottetown. Our place is almost beachfront in 40 years if we don't do anything. That's the reality of it.
Hmm. Good, thank you. One question that a lot of people are interested in, although they don't all understand because they don't use the services, but the other parties have been talking a lot about what to do about the tolls on the Wood Island Ferry and on the bridge. What's the NDP stand on those tolls?
I'm going to tell you what my stand is on this bill, because it's not something that we've talked about it at conventions off and on. First, remember, these are two private corporations, and the federal government has a contract with Strait Crossing, and it goes on until I think 2032. Any changes that we make on fees in on the tolls of the bridge are going to be paid direct payments to a private sector corporation, because the private sector corporation is not going to experiment or live through any loss of profit margin on this. They're not going to do that. That's not the contract. So we have the decision to reduce tolls on the bridge means that we're making a decision to pay a private contractor for this money for some sort of benefit. Anything that happens on the bridge has to happen at the same time on the ferry. And the ferry to the Magdalenes, by the way, because we're not going to separate out Northumberland ferries or the ferry to the Maggies. So we have three separate corporations that we're going to be paying money to when we have a housing crisis and a healthcare crisis and an affordability crisis. So let's just say, because people are talking about fees, that we've reduced the fees $50. Okay. So let's say the average islander uses that twice a year, $100. And say it's $150, doesn't matter. Wouldn't it be better if we put the restrictions on grocery corporations and could save an island family $750 to $1,200 a year, rather than reducing the cost on the ferries and the bridge by what's going to amount to $150 a year? All right. It's just a matter. Remember what I said about governments looking where governments spend their money. When a government decides to subsidize a transportation company and exclude investments in housing and health or affordability, it's because they're putting, it's a sexy kind of thing, because everybody says, oh, that's great. That's great. Well, wouldn't it be better to actually afford food? Because there's lots of people that can't afford to use the ferry or the link, but they do need to eat every day. And I would say, just relax. The bridge is going to be ours in a few short years. We can make decisions without having to pay huge monies to private corporations. As it is right now, if you have to go off island for a medical reason, you're allowed to claim those fees. And if we wanted to do something on an interim basis, we could look at saying, just like they did in Nova Scotia, the Cobequid Pass, if you're in an island plated vehicle, then you can get a reduced fare if you're on PEI. It's still the same subsidy to that private corporation, but it's not going to be into the millions of dollars every year, and that might be a way to adjust it. I, for one, don't think that unless we regulate corporations, the grocery corporations, reducing the fees for trucks that are crossing the link or on the ferry, are going to actually lead to a reduction in grocery prices. I just don't think that's going to happen.
I think I appreciate that, and thank you for that answer. I think that clarifies for a lot of people the thinking on the issue of the tolls on the Confederation Bridge and the Wood Island Ferry. And I forgot about the third ferry. Of course, the Magdalen ferry would be a part of that too. Well, we're almost at the end of our time. Are there any issues or comments that we haven't talked about that you'd like to make sure that we talk to your voters in Charlottetown today?
I think what I've been saying to voters is that this idea of tax cuts, for example, that we see coming out in Carney's campaign and we see coming out in Poilievre's campaign, Liberals and Conservatives. I've approached this for a long, long time, Bill, that don't tell me you want tax cuts, because taxes are the way we pay for common services and some goods. And so I tell people, don't tell me you want tax cuts. Tell me which services you don't want. So we heard this, we heard this through the 1990s, that people will use politicians, especially the ones that tend to focus wealth upwards, will use the definition of tax cuts, middle class tax cuts. But if you have to deliver tax cuts by cutting services on health or housing, or reducing even the limited part of dental care or pharmacare that we have, this is not an advance for anybody. And tax cuts are a way that we make sure we deliver on the programs. And my final note is, and I've said this pretty clearly, is that we have a class conflict issue in the country. And the neoliberal economic agenda that we've watched for 50 years under liberals and conservatives, and they, by the way, it's this, the oligarchy in this country doesn't care which party gets elected because they're going to be treated the same, all right? And so we have consistently sacrificed those who are most vulnerable in our societies to allow the wealthiest in our society to get ahead. And then we justify it. The corporations are going to be good because they're going to be paying out dividends. Well, wealth does not trickle down. The evidence of 5 decades says it won't do that. What we need is to allow wealth to trickle up. Let's take care of the most vulnerable amongst us. Let's focus on affordability and health and housing. And don't worry about what that loon in the United States is going to do. The Republicans can fix him or not fix him. And we have nothing to say about that. But we do have something to say about how we take care of ourselves. If we focus on taking care of the most vulnerable, seniors, single unattached women, people that are struggling either for health reasons or economic reasons, people that are working poor, this is the way that we have the strongest response to the economic crisis that Trump is enforcing on us, because we'll take care of what we can take care of without considering how he's going to feel about that, because I'm not actually that interested in how he feels.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Joe Byrne. Joe Byrne is the candidate for the NDP for the riding of Charlottetown here on PEI. We thank him for joining us today, and thank you for watching another presentation in cooperation with CARP, Canadian Association of Retired Persons. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Bill.
But there's a little island I long there to be. Prince Edward Island is heaven to me.